Well, the NBA playoffs have been absolutely insane. So many different things to talk about. The Phoenix Suns falling in epic fashion. James Harden and the Sixers are out, and the Milwaukee Bucks are out by the Boston Celtics advancing. So many things to discuss. So we needed to do things here on Game On and change it up. So we are doing sort of an NBA roundtable, even though it's going to look like a square, a four-person square. Imagine it being a roundtable in your living room. And joining us to talk about the NBA and be part of this roundtable is our very own Nick Morgasen from Empty the Bench, and also joining us from the 3 and D over with our friends at the Review and Preview channel is Paul Lombardi. Nick, Paul, welcome. How are you guys?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for having me on, Johnny. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Paul. Your show is great. I tune in every week, so it's a pleasure to have you aboard. And Nick's always great, and we always appreciate when he comes on. We know he loves basketball, so we had an idea over here at Game On to do this. And like I said, we wanted to throw in some surprises, and this is one of them. Doing a little bit of a roundtable. Of course, like I said, folks, you do have to envision us being at your table right now. But guys, thanks a lot for joining us. There's a lot of different things to talk about regarding the NBA playoffs as the two conference final games. One gets going tonight, another one will get going on Wednesday. But Paul, Nick, a lot of the discussion the last 24, 36 hours has been on the Phoenix Suns because a lot of experts, a lot of people were talking about Phoenix possibly being an NBA Finals team. When you look out west, I wasn't quite there yet, but understood why. This series, Paul, I'll start with you. Absolutely insane for so many different reasons, but what's your overall sense on what the heck happened to Phoenix?
I think it was an epic collapse. I thought that it was absolutely insane. The Suns were my pick to not only make it to the NBA Finals, but I thought they were going to win the NBA Finals. I was super impressed with the way that they played all year long. I thought that they had a great structurally sound team. Devin Booker and Chris Paul are obviously their studs, but I thought that their role players, Shamet and Cam Johnson, and all the rest of them were just amazing. Were amazing supporting cast, and it's difficult. I saw something on Twitter which was a tremendous point today, where in today's NBA, part of the reason why Chris Paul hasn't been able to get over the edge and win an NBA championship. And I mean, he made it to the NBA Finals last year, but why he can't get over it. It's very difficult for a small point guard to be the dominant force on an NBA team nowadays in a league that's full of big wings and even athletic point guards. I mean, and even ridiculously tall point guards. Like, you can even consider Giannis at point forward and all those kind of guys. It's very difficult. The one outlier in that case is Steph Curry. And Steph Curry basically is the greatest shooter that the world has ever seen. So that's how he makes up for it. But Chris Paul, his craftiness and his old school kind of play, he probably would be a 4-time NBA champion if he played in the 90s. For a good team. But in today's NBA, it's very difficult. And Devin Booker also is still young, tremendous player, but he gets a little streaky at times, doesn't come up in the big games. And when you have those two factors as the guys leading your team, it's difficult and it becomes pretty apparent. Those are facts that kind of slip my mind. And I really overlooked it. I saw them make it to the NBA Finals last year, and I thought, this is Chris Paul's time. He's finally going to win his NBA championship. I thought the Suns were somewhat destined, but it's a tremendous point. And when you go up against a team even like Dallas too, who's got Luka and Jalen Brunson became an amazing player, but they don't have really too many other studs besides Luka. You have a good supporting cast, but they got tall, lengthy role players, Dorian Finney-Smith, for example, Maxi Kleber, for example, just good players who give you length and, know their roles. Those are all key pieces. And then Luka, being a 6'7" point guard that literally does everything is, I think he's establishing himself as a top 3 player in the NBA after that series. It's ridiculous, but that's my personal opinion on the collapse of the Suns.
I know Nick did a Sports Minute for Monday about this. Nick, what did you think about what happened, what transpired there?
Well, one, to piggyback off of Paul's point, being up 2-0 last year and completely blowing up the bed and completely losing was an abomination on Chris Paul's record in the playoffs. Chris Paul is turning into James Harden in the playoffs, where he can't complete anything at all whatsoever. He's a great leader and a facilitator, but he can't lead a team to victory. Now, to go back on another point, I would also include Embiid and Jokic in those guys who are point forwards who really can control the basketball. It's weird. It's like Paul said, back in the 90s, the small point guards were the domination. Now it's the big guys who are dribbling the ball up half court and really playing that game. But to go back to the Suns, now that Devin Booker is off his relationship with Kendall Jenner, maybe he can now worry about winning on the court instead of off the court. Devin Booker, who can't control his own ego off the court and thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, maybe he can actually figure out how to have winning chemistry on the court as well. And then I'm still confused that DeAndre Ayton, who basically blew up the ego of this team after he didn't get his contract extension and only plays 17 minutes and scores 5 points in Game 7. That one was confusing to me as well. And I'm going to steal a Screamin' A or Stephen A, however you want to call him at this point, where he says Devin Booker and Chris Paul were smaller than mini-me on the court in Game 7, combining for 21 points on 7 of 22 shooting in Game 7. That's blasphemous, as he would say.
So it is, and that's not winning basketball. You know, that's you're not. I mean, you're not going to be able to win. It came down to Chris Paul and Devin Booker having to basically carry the entire load, and it's very difficult for Chris Paul to, you know, be able to become that guy, especially when he's got such lengthy players that he's going up against. You know, it comes down to size, I think, a lot of times.
And also Luka, who had 35 points through 3 quarters. This guy was dominating down the stretch. It's almost like the Suns gave up after making a big lead in this series. And they said, we'll win one of those games and we won't have to worry about it. We'll take it easy. Well, I think they kind of took their foot off the gas pedal and eventually cost them the series because you knew Luka was not going to give up. But everyone was writing off Dallas, thinking that the Suns were just going to run away and sweep this thing. I never thought they were going to sweep. I agree with you, Paul. I thought the Suns were going to go to the finals and possibly win this thing. But I didn't expect the Suns to just drop off.
No, absolutely. And I think you started to see the Suns kind of went throughout the entire regular season as the best team in basketball, and they dominated everybody. And, you know, they finished 64-18. And by far the best record in the NBA. And then that Pelican series, you started to see a little bit of untrusting and a little bit of life coming from the rest of the teams. I mean, the NBA playoffs are tough. The NBA playoffs are tough. You're going to get the best version of most players. Then there's certain players that don't step up in the playoffs and they go down as, you know, being a tremendous player like James Harden, but it's easy. He'll forever be remembered unless he, you know, is able to win an NBA championship one day. He'll forever be remembered as, he was a great regular season guy, but, you know, can never do it in the playoffs. But you're going to get 100. You're going to get the best version. You saw it the Pelicans. I mean, Brandon Ingram had a tremendous series. Jose Alvarado out of nowhere. I mean, I liked him when he was in college, but I never thought that he would, you know, start making a playoff run in the NBA. I think that's part of it. And it kind of got into the Suns' heads because that was the first time that they kind of had to come back down to earth and they weren't the most dominant team.
I'll finish this off on one point and I'll compare it to another Phoenix Sun way back in history, not way back, but didn't win anything either. He's a certain guy on a TNT broadcast that hasn't won anything, especially in a Suns uniform. Charles Barkley. CP3 and Charles Barkley have very similar motives here. Like, they're not winning. They're there to collect the paycheck. Now, let's be real. Chris Paul is making what? $45 million, I think was the last time I checked on the cap. He's he's there for the dollars. He's not there to win.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say now is how long is that window really for Phoenix to win?
It's one more year on a contract.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Absolutely. Next year, the clock is ticking big time. the next year is a huge year for them. They have to bounce back.
And also the injury, which people are forgetting as well. We just found out today that he was playing through a hamstring injury, I think he was playing through.
You always find that out after a loss, though. You
never find that out after a win.
That's exactly it. I mean, I'm not trying to discredit him because I'm a big Chris Paul fan, and he probably was playing through an injury. But, was he playing through an injury every single playoffs throughout his career? He's done this every single playoffs in his career. Even back when he was on the Clippers, back when he was on the Rockets, he's never been able to get over the edge. So the injury can only hold him back so much.
I mean, what's ironic about Chris Paul as well, and I know we're on a tangent here, but do you remember when the Lakers? Oh no, the New Orleans ownership was up in the air. Yeah. And the Lakers were trying to swoop in and make a trade for him. And that's when the NBA owned the organization at the time. And they basically said, well, you're not taking our star from us. And that was going to be the beginning of like a bigger three in LA. I think mentally that affected his career path, in my honest opinion.
It could have, because he would have rather gone to the Lakers than the Clippers. He wanted to team up with Kobe. That was the thing. And that could have been a scary duo too, because Kobe was just coming off his 5th championship, and he was still, he wasn't the Kobe of the mid 2000s, but he was still a dominant player. And that was Chris Paul's prime. That was when he was at his best. I think that could have been a scary combination, but something we'll never know.
I think they probably would have. I mean, the more I think about it, they could have really been a true rival for the Thunder. No?
Oh, absolutely.
Who knows what the Thunder would have done if Chris Paul had joined the Lakers? And then, not to mention, there's still the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, maybe the Spurs are still successful, but yeah, it's always fascinating when I think about a lot of these NBA what ifs. There's so many that have changed the course of that history.
Conspiracy theories, a bunch in the NBA.
You can write a 700-page book about NBA conspiracy theories.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul Lombardi from the 3&D, Nick Morgasen here from Empty the Bench and Beyond the Bench, joining us here on Game On, doing a little NBA playoffs roundtable. Injuries have been in the season. Another big injury was Chris Middleton with the Bucks, and that series against the Celtics. I think what you found out in that series really was that Giannis was being relied on way too much, and he even said it at the end that he was absolutely exhausted. So you look at this series, and I think when it comes down to it, it really came down to the Bucks missing their second big player in Middleton.
No,
absolutely. And Nick, you can go first.
Yeah, I think the Middleton injury was just mentally exhausting. I don't know physically, because in the NBA playoffs, injuries happen. Injuries always happen. You have to push your way through. It just happens. But when you don't have your 1B guy, because that's how the NBA is. The big three is not really a thing anymore. The big threes just don't work. You have Miami, you have the Celtics. Those were your big threes, but those were traditional big threes where the guys were willing to take less money, willing to do their roles, and then they really had scrap as the rest of the team to fill it out. Now, Milwaukee is a good team. I consider Brook Lopez almost a B+ to a A- player around them. They have guys that are great shooters on that team, but when you don't have your 1B player, you're not going to win. Even though this went 7 games and Giannis left it all out on the court, the Celtics are just a better team.
It's absolutely true. And it became evident in last year's playoffs that Chris Middleton is literally the glue of the Milwaukee Bucks. Like Giannis is the star, I think the best player in basketball, but without Chris Middleton, it's very difficult for that team to win because he is the 1B, just like you were saying, Nick. I think that a lot of people kind of underestimate how key of a piece that he is, of how great of a defender he is, knockdown 3-point shooter, and a go-to second scorer behind Giannis, though, too. You got Drew Holiday, who is a great playmaker, a tremendous defender, all-world defender, and a good scorer, too. But when he has to be the second scoring option for your team, that's not an NBA title team. When he's your third or fourth scoring option and your number one defender and your playmaker, your top passing guy, that's the kind of team that's going to win it all, and that's the team that won it all last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Hank, I'm sorry, you had something I was going to cut you off there.
No. I was pretty much agreeing with you. Like, not having Chris Middleton definitely was something that hurt the Milwaukee Bucks. And it's funny, there were people telling me that Middleton was just as important to Giannis when they won that title, and honestly, I never really thought that was a stretch. And I knew going into that series, the Celtics were probably one of the worst possible matchups for the Milwaukee Bucks, and the reason being is their defense is by far one of the best in the league. And yeah, they've really had a big turnaround over the course of that season. They've absolutely dominated the second half. In fact, if they didn't have that bad start, they'd probably be the number one seed as we speak. So I think that'll be interesting to see how the Celtics do the rest of the way. And honestly, low-key, as someone who cannot stand them as a fan of a certain rival, I hate to say it, but I would not be shocked if those guys won championship.
Well, I'll give you one more. Marcus Smart, your defensive player of the year on that team, leading that defense. In my opinion, the Celtics were the best team in the league in defense. In my opinion, even though they have a lot of offensive weapons, you have Jason Tatum, who probably will be multiple MVPs down the line in his career. They play defense. They play both sides of the ball. It's rare because the Celtics back in the day were offensive first, defensive second. Now they're half and half on the ball. And that's why they're a much better team. Jason Tatum is the glue for that team. Like Middleton is the glue for the Bucks. So they need Tatum to keep leading this team in scoring. When you go back to that Nets series, he had, what do you have, I think he had at least one 50-point game in that series. And I think he had the buzzer beater in game one. I mean, this guy has a knack for the clutch.
Oh, absolutely. No,
and, one of the big things in that series with the Boston Celtics and regarding Marcus Smart was he really evolved into being more of a team player and being willing to share the ball. Like that moment, like right at the end when Tatum had that buzzer beater, if this had happened a few years ago, he would not have passed that ball. He would have just taken the shot himself, and the Celtics probably lose that one. So really goes to show how much that team has grown over the course of a few years.
Yeah, and one thing to watch for the Celtics going into their series against the Heat here is Marcus Smart, the guy you were just talking about. He's questionable because he suffered a midfoot sprain in Game 7. So they're gonna test it out during warmups later on today, and we'll see if he's available for Game 1, against the.
He's not missing a game. I'm telling you that right now. Boston is way too tough defensively. That you're too far into the playoffs now, where you can't miss games.
Yeah. And Robert Williams is back now, and there's no restrictions on him, so that'll be a big thing for Boston as well. Like we've been saying, injuries. I think it's been a trend throughout the playoffs. I mean, we know everybody's probably banged up, but you hear about the star players really dealing with something, and that happened in the Warriors-Grizzlies series. Ja Morant dealt with, his injury, and when you don't have your best player, and you look at what the Warriors have, and you're getting production from even Jordan Poole on top of, Curry and Klay Thompson. I mean, I've always said I think the Warriors are the most dangerous team in the playoffs still. With all those guys. And Draymond Green, as much as we talked about his antics and stuff, his defense is second to none. And one of the reasons why I think the Warriors have been successful for so long is this core group of players stays together. So you look at them in this series, and it definitely showed itself.
Can I just bring up a dumb point that Stephen A. made? Paul, you were there with me when we were watching First Take, and Stephen A. literally suggested that this is their last chance and they should blow it up. I wasn't Stephen A. It was Kendrick Perkins who said that, and
Kendrick Perkins,
him a new one.
Kendrick Perkins is delusional. Okay, yeah, Kendrick Perkins, even though the only reason he's at ESPN is because he won a championship with the Celtics. That's it. He hasn't done anything else in his career. If you look back, I read a story a couple of weeks ago that basically he was out partying, he was out drinking, he was smoking weed, he was doing all these things, and then ESPN comes calling and makes him the star, because that's, even though we hate the 4-letter network and we get annoyed with them, they made him a star, and he's a big name. So he should just shut up and mind his P's and Q's.
Absolutely. I think that.
I mean, this is the same Kendrick Perkins who suggested the Lakers straight up trade. What was it? They straight up trade AD for Kyrie Irving.
Yep.
Yeah, that would have gone well.
A straight trade, 1 for
And then
1.
Stephen A. was like, "What?"
Man, if you're the Nets, you'd make that trade. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy because I think that Stephen A's been calling it. I'll give Stephen A some credit because he's been calling it since the beginning. He's been on the Warriors bandwagon, and I think the Warriors are just so locked in right now too. I think Steph is they're also with all the teams that are left in the NBA playoffs too. It's going to come down to experience, and the Warriors by far have the most. And I think that over the Mavericks is going to be a key piece. And even if they meet the Celtics or the Heat, I think the Heat could be a problem because they're coming off, even though it was the bubble, and there was a lot of questions about if that's legitimate or not. They still have been in the NBA Finals within the past 2 years. So I'm very interested to see what kind of performance we get from the Warriors in this upcoming series.
Now, I just want to point out with the whole Ja Morant injury, I think he was the comeback player. Was he the sixth man or I think he was the sixth man of the year.
Comeback.
Oh no,
he was most improved player. Yeah.
So great player. He is going to be a star up there with the Tatums and there's going to be a great core of young stars going in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Ja Morant's got to stay healthy, though, because we've seen injuries all the way back to college with him where he can't stay healthy. He could be a great leader, but the weird thing is the Grizzlies kind of played well without him as well.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. And they're a very well coached team. They're a very structurally sound team, though, too. They remind me of what the Suns were becoming a few years ago before they added Chris Paul. And they weren't really winning, but they were starting to develop something. You started to see Booker was becoming a stud. You started to see Aiden beginning to develop, and some of their other young pieces. I think that they have a really good all-around team too. Valanciunas is one of the most underrated bigs in the NBA. He's had a transcendent last couple of seasons. He's become a dominant force not only on defense but on the offensive end too. I think the Grizzlies are. They're all around just a solid group, and I love what I see from them. And Valanciunas is on the Pelicans. That's my bad. Steven Adams is on the Grizzlies. They traded him away, but I love what I see from the Grizzlies, and I love the entire core together. Desmond Bain has been fantastic. Jaren Jackson Jr. is becoming a player. I think that they definitely have a future. I like your point too about Ja Morant. Reminds me a lot of a young Derrick Rose. They're completely different players. Well, I mean, not completely. They're somewhat similar, but they remind me in a sense where they're both athletic point guards, playmakers that rely on their athleticism big time, where a knee injury or something like that could end up being brutal to his career. And we just saw him get a knee injury with the Jordan Poole situation. And luckily there was no tears or anything like that. It was more of just a bruise, but you obviously pray for him to stay healthy. But whenever you have an athletic point guard like that his entire skill, like his main skill set is based around his athleticism, you're always running that risk.
It also means you're not going to have a long career, because if you have to base your career, Derrick Rose, who somehow hit the jackpot twice with the Knicks on 2 3-year deals, which still makes no sense to me, and Knicks fans are going to get all over me for it, but it's true. The man should have never got another contract, but somehow the Knicks and their ownership think that throwing money around is like going to a bar and getting drinks for free. I mean,
as the Knicks fan here, I'll say this: for the role that Rose was going to be with the team, I get why they did it. I think 3 years was too much, but that was one of the things with the problems with the Knicks this year was they were banking on Derrick Rose to be a big factor leadership wise and bench wise, and of course, he couldn't stay healthy. He missed a lot of time this year.
And when he was playing, the team was winning too. That's been the big key is since the Knicks retraded for Derrick Rose. he was part of the transcendence of their second half last year and making the playoffs. He was a big key piece, and to start the season when they started off pretty decently, he was a big piece. When he went down is when the script kind of flipped.
Absolutely.
That's why, in my opinion, they gave him the money that they gave him, because he the 3 years was definitely questionable. The years were the most questionable part, but the money was kind of just like, we have cap space and this guy is a main reason why we're winning, so we need to bring him back.
Yeah, and I think he'll help with the young kids, and the Knicks need to get a point guard. It's something we've been saying for the majority of the 21st century. Still waiting for one.
But can we talk
about
about the aggressiveness of the Warriors though also, because I don't think we give them enough credit either.
No, absolutely, it's true. It's definitely true. Draymond and the rest of them. I think one of the most amazing things about the Warriors too is kind of how they completely redid their bench and kind of flipped the script with a bunch of no-name guys and ended up becoming great players. Gary Payton II, getting like a fourth chance in the NBA. He's becoming a decent player. Juan Toscano Anderson, was a nobody that no one wanted out of Marquette. He's becoming a decent player. Damian Lee becoming a decent player. They just have Kevon Looney. Looney's been with them for a little while now, but he's a decent bench piece. And I think that player development has been a big thing for the Warriors. They're completely homegrown too. Like, you look at all of their studs, completely homegrown. Besides Kevin Durant, they don't really sign any big free agents. Besides Kevin Durant a few years ago, that was really it. They develop everybody that comes through them. Andre Iguodala too. He was an addition, but besides that, like Draymond, homegrown. Clay, Jordan Poole, Steph Curry, like they all came up through the system, and even these bench players too. These bench players like bounced around a little bit, might have played a little time with some other teams, but they were nobodies before they came to the Warriors and have become some solid players.
I would say Looney almost became the Bogut type player on the Warriors.
Yeah, roster, absolutely. Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Paul, real quick before I move on to the Heat and the Sixers, what did you think about all the flagrant fouls in that series?
I thought it wasn't anything like too besides the Dylan Brooks one. I don't think it was anything too crazy. The Jordan Poole one was, in my opinion, like he clearly wasn't trying to take out Morant's knee. Like he was reaching for the ball, and it was unfortunate. The Dylan Brooks one was very flagrant, and that was a really bad one. And I don't completely blame Dylan Brooks though. In the heat of the moment, you're in the NBA playoffs, you're trying to win the game and stuff. He's going up for a block, and he just got too physical with a defenseless player. And that happens sometimes. I don't think Gary Payton was going up to the basket, and Brooks purposely was like, I'm going to hurt this guy and take him out of the game. I don't think it was on purpose, but it was a terrible foul. And you got to control yourself better, especially as an NBA player. I think that was the worst one. All of the Draymond fouls and stuff too. It's like Draymond's at this point, he's not going to get the benefit of the doubt because he's been a complainer and a dirty player throughout his entire career. And that's what he's made a name off of. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're going to, you can't act like that. Everybody's out to get you, when they start calling tic-tac fouls on you, because that's just how it's
your reputation.
It's your reputation. You see that with everybody. They did that with Dennis Rodman. They did that. They did that with Rasheed Wallace. Anytime he would open his mouth, he'd get a technical foul at one point because he was getting technical fouls every single game, it seemed like. So none of the refs were making a point at the beginning of the game, like, we're not putting up with this. If you even open your mouth, we're giving you a technical foul.
Ron
Artest, another example. There's certain guys that are, especially on the refs lists, of guys that are just nonstop, play dirty and excessive when it comes to foul calls and all that kind of stuff. And Draymond's one of them, so he's not going to get the benefit of the doubt on any call. And he's just kind of got to accept that and not complain about it. Like, that's part of his game.
it's also not getting the benefit of the doubt when you're constantly talking bad about the NBA like Draymond does on his podcasts. And I'm so tired of this. Draymond's the voice. Draymond's this. He's the voice of reason. Come on. He does a podcast. How many NBA players have a podcast? 100? I mean, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course he's going to get viewership too, because, he's Draymond Green, 3-time NBA champion. You're going to get viewers.
I mean, I also think it's wrong that when you flip two birds, one, it was Kyrie, then it was Draymond. Draymond comes out and says, "Oh, I make $25 million. What is a fine to me?" I mean, Can the NBA do something and make him hurt?
It's very egotistical when you go on your podcast and you trash the league nonstop, and then you go out there, flip everybody off, and then you say, "Oh, I get paid $25 million. So what's a fine for me?" So you're basically saying, so the league that you're consistently trashing is the same league that pays you $25 million to play a sport. That's the crazy thing about it.
But you know what? They like the attention. That's why they're not doing anything to him, because they know when he says something, everyone's going to pay attention to the NBA. So that's why they're not going to do anything until it hurts them financially, or it hurts them physically, mentally, or emotionally. They're not going to care.
Exactly. It's never going to hurt viewership of Draymond trashing the NBA. Everybody's going to still watch the NBA. So so there's nothing that they're going to really step in to do.
Unless you're dealing with a Daryl Morey situation where he talked about China and he completely destroyed the relationship with the NBA and China, and that's how he ended up with the Sixers, because Houston had to completely separate because they lost their contract for games. That's the only time or reason you're going to see a situation be handled like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And real quick, this other series, the Heat and the Sixers, boy, a lot to discuss there. Whether it's Joel Embiid's injury or, when James Harden being a no-show in Game 6. Paul, where do you want to go with this?
Well, I think that the James Harden kind of debacle was, kind of expected. I think that Joel Embiid is a tremendous player, and had he been completely healthy, it could have been a little bit different. But also, Miami is incredibly well coached. We're talking about a top 10, possibly a top 10 coach of all time in Eric Spoelstra. He's absolutely incredible, gets the best out of his players. And Jimmy Butler had a tremendous series. And this team is also, coming off of an Eastern Conference championship just 2 years ago. They are more structurally sound. I think that they have more depth, and they got a little bit better performance. The main thing that I thought was interesting was basically, besides Embiid, how the rest of the team was basically a no-show. In the pivotal moments, you saw even some key players like Danny Green, who's won several NBA championships, kind of did nothing. And that definitely makes you question Doc Rivers at the end of the day, because besides his championship with the Celtics, he's got a long history of this in the 2010s where his team just stops playing for him in the playoffs.
Doc's got to shut his mouth, too, when he's talking to the media. I mean, you're going to go out after the media whose job it is to cover you as a living, and you're going to say, write what you want, do what you want. I know how I'm comfortable. Hey, Doc, how about win a big game, and then people won't say bad things about you?
That's definitely true.
I mean, this series was so odd. James Harden being the leader of this team was a mistake. Now, Embiid was out for a few games. That didn't help the situation at all. But if you're going to rely on Harden to be your scorer, and I thought Embiid said something interesting towards the end of the series, that he's more the facilitator, not the scorer. So obviously Embiid doesn't trust him as a scoring guy. So this team is actually in a massive mess right now.
When they traded for Harden, I really I wasn't convinced that their team, especially this year, was really going to do anything, because I thought that they were kind of left decimated. They were bringing in Harden, who had the injuries, if you even want to call them injuries, and has been on a noticeable decline too over the past year or two. He's not the MVP James Harden that he was 5 years ago. And you got Joel Embiid too, who is a tremendous player, but very injury prone, and got injured again in the playoffs. And they're a little too reliant on him. And the rest of the team too. Tyrese Maxey is just becoming a great player. Like he's still pretty raw, only a second-year player. And you got Matisse Thybulle, who basically did nothing. Is a great defensive player, but did nothing in the playoffs. And I still think that they have a lot of ways to go before they're an actual NBA championship contender. I think that they need to go after some different guys. They need to kind of change up the team a little bit. They're all in on a Harden and Embiid big two, which is doing this trade. They're kind of stuck with that because Harden's going to opt into his contract. So whether they like it or not, Harden and Embiid are their big two. They have to figure out what is going to be the good supporting cast around that for next year in order to win an NBA title. And it'll be interesting to see.
I'll add one.
I'm pretty sure Harden's washed at this point.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that as a Net fan. But the one point I'll make as a caveat: Jimmy Butler twisted the knife after this series was over by completely going after the Sixers. You guys should have kept Tobias Harris. I mean, you know what? I have no sympathy for the Sixers. They could have kept Jimmy Butler if they wanted to. That just became a horrible relationship for whatever reason. When you had a Butler and a Tobias Harris and you had guys to build around to win a title, and maybe Simmons would still be there if the team was still not in shambles. I think Simmons just didn't like the team. I don't think he had injuries or mental health issues. I think he just wanted out.
I think that was a big part of it. I think he was tired of the team. He didn't see them going anywhere, and with just him and Embiid. And I think they had a great thing going when they had Jimmy Butler. And losing Jimmy Butler was a huge piece. I mean, Tobias Harris is a good player, but for an NBA title team, he's a fourth option. He's not anything more than that. Jimmy Butler, you're talking about a 1 or a 2 for an NBA title team because he does literally everything. The Miami Heat might win the NBA title this year, and he's their number one option. They made it to the NBA Finals 2 years ago, and he's their number one option. So it's an interesting type of dynamic. If they were able to keep him with Embiid too, and he's an extremely durable player though to Jimmy Butler. You don't see him hurt very often, and I think that's a big key.
God, that would be a heck of a finals if we had Heat Warriors.
I would love that. That'd be insane.
Speaking of that, Paul Lombardi and Nick Morgasen joining us here on the show. Let's get to it. It's your 2 conference semifinals. What do you think, real quick, coming out of these 2 series, Paul?
My personal opinion, I'm going to be I think that the Warriors will definitely take it. I see the Mavericks are close, and the Mavericks have surprised everybody, but they're still extremely reliant on Luka. And once again, I think that the true experience from this Warriors team too is going to come out and play a big factor. I'm taking the Warriors, and I'm going to take the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. This is going to go 7 games, though, in my opinion. I think that it's screaming 7 games. It could go any which way. I'm going to be rooting for the Heat, so I'm going to guess the Heat too. Obviously, as a Knicks fan, I'm not going to be rooting for the Celtics. But
but if you're a Knicks fan, you can't root for the Heat either, though. Even though those days are long gone.
It's true.
It's like picking the poison, trying to pick which one is worse.
It's true. I mean, it's the Boston Celtics, though. The Celtics are up there. Are up there as one of the teams that I hate the most in all of sports. So I have to, I have to put my bias aside for the Heat. I respect, I hated the Heat obviously when they had LeBron and they have history with the Knicks and stuff like that. But I respect this Heat team that they have put together because, I like Jimmy Butler. I think Eric Spoelstra is a tremendous head coach. I've always been a Spoelstra fan. And I think he's a key part to even that big 3 winning 2 championships. I think that he's a great player. I like Bam. I'd like to see them make another run and possibly win the NBA title. So I'm definitely going to be rooting for them. I'm pulling for the Mavericks in my person. I don't really mind who wins the series. I'll pull for the Mavericks just because, I'm a big Dirk fan. Like I grew up, I was a diehard Dirk fan. Dirk is my favorite basketball player ever. So I used to, when the Knicks sucked throughout my childhood, I used to root for the Mavericks a little bit. They were my Western Conference team.
Talk about the most unconventional 7-footer in all of the NBA.
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong. One of the greatest shooters of all time. Most unconventional 7-footer.
Oh, absolutely. He was a transcendent player. That's what I loved about him too, is that he did everything his own way. But I was a huge Dirk fan, so I always have a little soft spot for Dallas. I like Luka too. So, and they're also the underdogs too. The Warriors have won 3 championships. I love Steph Curry, but there's definitely a lot of things to hate about the Warriors. A lot of people don't like Draymond. There's going to be a little bit of cockiness, all that kind of stuff. So, I'm going to be pulling for the Mavericks, but I don't think that they're going to stand a chance. I think the Warriors are going to end up winning it.
I think on the Miami side also, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson are 2 key players that really need to step up and play way better.
Absolutely.
Hero had the major contract in the offseason. I think it was like $95 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Duncan Robinson, a big one too. He just signed a huge contract, and he's been getting a couple of DNPs throughout the playoffs. So if those 2 guys can really step up along with Jimmy Butler, and Bam plays big man basketball, which is what he's well known for, they're going to win the series. Now, the Celtics looked a little, even though they won in 7 games, they looked a little lost for a while in the Bucks series for big man defense. They had no answer for that. That was going to be the interesting thing to watch. Now, on the other side, I like the Warriors. I like the experience. I always think experience plays when you have that. When you have the Draymonds, the Clays, and the Stephs, obviously those guys are going to win. And I think those guys are I think they're too much. I like Luka, like you said, Paul. I'm a big Luka guy. Talk about a guy. I think he's like 6'7" as a point guard. I mean, we're talking about big guys at the point guard position that are mobile and can move around the court. But I just think the experience is going to fall to the Warriors. I think both are going to go at least 6 games, at least. And I could see them both going 7, really. But I have Heat Warriors, and I think in that case, I still think the Warriors are more experienced in that regard. Yeah,
I've got a fun fact for you guys, by the way.
Okay.
This is a tradition. Oh, you know this, Paul. This is a Hank fun fact. This is a tradition here on Game On.
he loves fun facts.
That's right.
So I found out that the Celtics have been in exactly half of the conference finals in NBA history, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I thought I read that too.
I also have to say this is going to be, I think this is got to be the 4th or 5th time the Heat have played the Celtics in the conference finals.
Yes.
I know that happened multiple times during the LeBron era, and we know that happened a couple years ago in the bubble.
Yeah.
That one's definitely going to be an interesting series. I think that one goes the full 7, but ultimately I think the Celtics are going to take that one. Now, as far as the Warriors go, I think at the end of the day, as much as Luka Doncic is amazing, I cannot count out the Warriors and their experience with the big 3 of Clay, Steph, and Draymond, plus Jordan Poole, he's also really shown up and been balling during these NBA playoffs. I got to give it to the Warriors there. So could be an interesting possibility for the NBA Finals with the Warriors playing the winner of the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely. And, any which way, it's going to be an epic 2 games and an epic final. And it's been an epic NBA playoffs in general. I mean, with the best team possibly out in the Phoenix Suns. We'll see what happens. But Paul Lombardi from the 3&D over at Review and Preview, and our own Nick Morgasen here on Empty the Bench, both joining us for a nice 45-minute NBA roundtable. And that's how great it's been. We needed every minute of it. So, Paul, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll have you back on again soon. And Nick, of course, thank you as always.
Of course, anytime, guys.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You got it.